The topic for today was supposed to be what message I might have for my Christian brothers and sisters. I think this could be a very good intro. I'm also happy to speak about Kairos, about anything else that you might have interest in. Last night, many people said I was speaking too quickly, and I do sometimes swallow words. So if you don't understand anything, again, I've said to some of you, I was a foreign exchange student in high school in Sweden many, many years ago for the summer, but I learned like one Swedish insult, and everybody tried to would laugh at me as I would try to pronounce the number 7, which I still cannot. So it'll have to be in English in any case. But I'll just say my name is Rabbi Arik Ascherman. For 21 years, I led an organization called Rabbis for Human Rights. In fact, even before I started in 1995, Svenska kyrkan was one of the first earliest supporters of Rabbis for Human Rights. And it was always very, very meaningful that with whatever divides our religions, that we have certain concepts of justice that unite us. I left Rabbis for Human Rights in 2016, and I have a new human rights organization called Torah, the Torah of Justice. And we can talk about that as well. But so yes, maybe we should just read the ambassador's letter. You can do it in Swedish because I've already heard the English, and then that could be a good beginning of our discussion.
Israels ambassadör skriver: kräv ett slut på Svenska kyrkans hat mot Israel. Svenska kyrkans traditionella agg mot Israel har blivit rutin och en fix idé, skriver Israels ambassadör Ilan Ben-Dov. Sedan jag kommit till Sverige har jag mött många goda och hängivna vänner till Israel, vart jag än har begivit mig. Jag har funnit vänner i riksdagen, i affärslivet, bland studenter och universitetslärare och på många andra håll. Mot bakgrund av detta är det väldigt svårt att förlika sig med att Svenska kyrkans hållning mot Israel är så fientlig och i själva verket ger uttryck för ställningstagande mot den judiska staten och är bland de mest aggressiva och fientliga överhuvudtaget. De som under senare år följt vad som sagts och skrivits i saken från Svenska kyrkans håll kan lätt få intrycket att dessa uttalanden formulerats av Hamas och inte av Svenska kyrkan. Väl medveten om allt detta blev jag egentligen inte särskilt förvånad när jag läste ärkebiskop Antje Jackeléns svar på debattartikeln av Annika Borg som var inne för någon vecka sedan. Det traditionella agget mot Israel har blivit rutin och en fix idé. Jag kommer inte att beröra allt som skrivits av ärkebiskop Jackelén, men några punkter kräver ett svar. Ärkebiskop Jackelén hänvisar några gånger till sitt stöd för Israels rätt att existera. Detta är en arrogant och förmäten formulering. Staten Israel behöver inte Svenska kyrkans tillåtelse eller godkännande för sin existens. Man frågar sig om ärkebiskopen på samma sätt skulle uttala sitt godkännande av Norges eller Frankrikes rätt att existera. Israel existerar först och främst på grundval av det judiska folkets naturliga och självskrivna rätt till självständighet i sitt urgamla hemland Israel. Israel existerar också till följd av sin förmåga till självförsvar mot de som söker utplåna staten. I samtal för några veckor sedan med en hög företrädare för Svenska kyrkan föreslog jag att man, i det fall man önskade göra en gest av åtminstone minimal goodwill, i så fall lämpligen kunde officiellt gratulera Israel på födelsedagen. Jag tog det här knappast behöva påpeka att detta inte var ett för Svenska kyrkan godtagbart förslag. Svenska kyrkan kan helt enkelt inte förmå sig att uttrycka någonting positivt om Israel. Det förefaller som att något sådant skulle gå emot dess själva DNA. Allt man sagt och skrivit om Israel under senare år är av en negativ och fientlig natur. En av de mest okänsliga formuleringarna i artikeltexten och som samtidigt närmar sig det absurda är när från ärkebiskop Jackelén motiverar varför Svenska kyrkan avstod från att gratulera Israel på 70-årsdagen, eftersom kyrkan tidigare publicerat ett uttalande på årsdagen för Auschwitz befrielse. Denna häpnadsväckande formulering visar en gång på hur Svenska kyrkan cyniskt utnyttjar sin påstådda kamp mot antisemitism. Det är som om kyrkan härmed skulle få legitimitet för den radikala och brutala kampanj mot Israel som man nu bedrivit under så många år. Jag tillhör långt ifrån dem som ser all kritik mot Israel som antisemitism. Vad vi emellertid fått se från Svenska kyrkans sida under senare år avviker dock så gott som aldrig från den extremt Israelfientliga linjen. Kyrkan sympatiserar med de mest radikalt anti-israeliska organisationer, inklusive sådana som förespråkar bojkott mot Israel, utmålar landet som en rasiststat och demoniserar det. Försöket att använda kampen mot antisemitism som ett sätt att skyla över och maskera en extremt anti-israelisk hållning är inget annat än hyckleri, och jag anser att det vore på tiden att upphöra med detta. Ärkebiskopen predikar i mästrande ton för Israel om behovet av skydd för mänskliga rättigheter. Israel är i själva verket ett lysande exempel på omsorgen om mänskliga rättigheter, trots att man som enda land i världen står under konstant och omedelbart hot om utplåning, värnas ändå människorätten och internationell lag. I sammanhanget kan nämnas att det bara är några dagar sedan Irans högste ledare Ayatollah Khomeini beskrev Israel som en cancer, en svulst som måste skäras bort och förstöras. Ärkebiskopen fann det emellertid inte påkallat att gå ut och fördöma honom för hans uttalande. Inget annat land i världen upprätthåller, trots att det är omgivet av dussintals mordiska terrororganisationer som önskar att utplåna det, ändå ett rättssamhälle, yttrandefrihet, ett oberoende rättsväsende, minoritetsrättigheter, jämställdhet mellan könen, rättigheter för hbtq-personer, trosfrihet och politiska rättigheter som staten Israel gör. Ärkebiskopen försöker vidare också att undervisa Israel om betydelsen av internationell rätt. Israel respekterar internationell rätt. Jag skulle dock vilja ta tillfället att ställa följande fråga till ärkebiskopen. När en självmordsbombare rusar in på ett café eller en terrorist springer emot dig med en kniv eller yxa, förväntas du då försvara dig med en handbok i internationell rätt? Jag tror det var kyrkohandboken. Har ärkebiskopen någonsin försökt förstå vad det innebär för ett demokratiskt och öppet samhälle att leva i en miljö av våldsförhärligande islamistisk terrorism där man halshugger sina offer? Hur mycket illvilja kan man från ett behagligt tjänsterum i Sverige uppbringa när man ska tala om Israel och internationell rätt? Har medlemmar av Hamas, Hezbollah, Islamiska Jihad, Isis och Al-Qaida någonsin hört talas om internationell rätt? Som jag ovan nämnt skulle jag fortfarande ha mycket att säga om det ärkebiskopen skrivit. Men detta sagt måste ändå en särskild viktig fråga beröras. När det gäller Israel agerar Svenska kyrkan som en rent politisk organisation med en politisk agenda som man inte ens besvärar om att försöka dölja. Frågan är, hur kan det komma sig att bara en enda åsikt förmår göra sig hörd i en sån organisation? I vissa av de samtal jag haft med medlemmar i Svenska kyrkan har jag fått höra att Israel förvisso har vänner inom kyrkan, men att dessa är rädda att framföra sin åsikt. Därför måste man här åter fråga sig, hur har situationen kunnat utvecklas till något som närmar sig det gamla Sovjet, där människor inte vågar säga sin mening? Som det har påpekats krävs det ett mycket stort mått av civilkurage för att ställa sig upp i Svenska kyrkan och säga, jag är en vän av Israel. Detta för mig till den allra sista fråga som måste ställas. Finns det inom Svenska kyrkan en grupp av modiga medlemmar som är uppriktiga nog att ställa sig upp och kräva att kyrkan sätter stopp för den hatiska politiken gentemot Israel? Skriver då Israels ambassadör.
Not clear what he thinks. So, as I listened to the translation of this, it made me quite upset, and I told Anna I'd be happy as an Israeli rabbi to myself write a response, because I think some of what he had to say is somewhere between outrageous and disingenuous and very tricky. I can't fully, I have no idea how the Swedish public will hear an article like that. I'm not fully aware, of course, of everything that the church says or does. I can certainly say something to how those kinds of statements reflect some of the mentality of the Israeli public. Let me start first of all by saying that many times, and I frequently speak to Christian groups when I travel, and I also speak to many Christian groups who come to visit in Israel and Palestine. And often, at the end of a discussion, the question that I'm asked either directly or indirectly is, what can we do with all of this knowledge that we now have? I think it's probably a little different in Sweden, but certainly when I speak to audiences from many countries, they say, if we go back and breathe a word of what we've seen and what we're feeling in our hearts, we'll be called anti-Israel, anti-Semitic, and so what do we do? And I always give 3 pieces of advice. The first is, we all need to check ourselves. We are human beings. We all have biases. We all have biases that we're not even always aware of. And it is important that we check ourselves, all of us, and try as much as humanly possible to discover our own biases. For example, if we take, for example, the Kairos document, which I think is an amazing document.
I don't know if everybody's familiar with the Kairos document, so if you can mention a little bit
about it. So I was just thinking of it because you mentioned there's a group here that you're part of, the Kairos, I don't know what it's called here, Kairos Sweden or whatever, but something like this. Kairos is an amazing document. I remember meeting with the Latin Patriarch at the time, Michel Sabah, during the Second Intifada. And he was telling me, quietly, that he had spoken to Yasser Arafat at the time, telling him to stop the violence. Stop the Palestinian violence. But that was all behind the scenes. And the Kairos document, which came out a few years later, which Michel Sabah was part of, folks, some of the Lutheran liberation theology people like Miti Rahab and like Naim Atik and others, people that you may know, were very involved. And this was a very important document because it was a public Christian critique coming from very Christian sources of Palestinian violence. It was also very much a patriotic Palestinian document. Okay? And so, for example, it doesn't say that if as Christians we're opposed to violence, therefore as Palestinians we have to simply accept whatever the Israelis want to do to us. It talks about nonviolent resistance. It endorses BDS. It is and in other words, and I should say that I'm not wholeheartedly either opposed or in favor of BDS. There's some aspects I agree with, there's some I do not agree with. And we can talk about that later as well. But the point is that it is not only, the document doesn't only say what we're against, it says what we're for. What is a nonviolent way to work for Palestinian human rights and liberation. However, and here's why I'm bringing this up in the context of biases. When Jewish eyes read this document, there are in it, intentionally or unintentionally, there is Christian supersessionary theology in the document. Okay?
Excuse me, vad betyder det?
It would be the idea that the covenant, the idea that the covenant with the Jews, between God and the Jews, was ended, abrogated, and there is now a new covenant with Christians that supersedes, that overrules.
Yes.
Okay. Because for example, so that's what I mean when I say that we all have biases. I think when the ambassador asks, as Anna was explaining to me, it makes perfect sense that the church is not in the habit of sending birthday greetings when countries have their independence days or anniversaries, and it was simply a underhanded comment on the ambassador's part to try to criticize the Archbishop for that, and even ignoring the explanation that he had given the ambassador. It may be more legitimate to ask, would the church criticize a statement like that by the Iranian leader, even from a theological point of view? Might that have been appropriate to, and I don't know, again, how that would fit in or not fit in with what general policy of the church would be. Okay? I can tell you that the average Israeli believes that the whole world hates us, that the whole world is anti-Semitic, that when we talk about, and we also as Israeli human rights organizations, talk about upholding international law, the average Israeli sees international law as a gun pointed at our heads, which is simply trying to discriminate against Israel. Now, of course, that's not true. International law, for many Jews who were involved in writing international law, given our historical experiences, and the last thing that was intended was for it to be a gun specifically directed against the heads, against Israel. It is true that sometimes it seems like the way it's applied is sometimes applied in a discriminatory way, specifically against Israel. Although I should backtrack for a second and say that from international law has always been, for everybody, a club to get the other guy with and not to look at yourself. Why is it that underneath the International Declaration of Human Rights, we have two bodies of international law, one about economic rights and the other about political rights? It's because back in the 1940s, the Communist bloc wanted to club the West over the head about economic issues, justice issues, and the West wanted to club the Communist bloc over the head about political freedoms. And nobody wanted so much to look at themselves, they just wanted to look at what we could accuse somebody else of. But it is true, for example, that when the UN Human Rights Commission spends, it seems, more time dealing with Israel than many other human rights issues around the world. And, you know, as an Israeli, as a rabbi, as a Jew, as a Zionist, I'm first and foremost concerned about what my people are doing. The fact that there are other things going on worse in other places or as bad isn't much comfort to me, because this is what I'm responsible for. Okay? But it is true that when you see some of the way that some of these international bodies work, it is perfect ammunition for our Israeli demagogues to say to Israelis, you see, this is what we've always told you. Now, I think, in fact, from what I understand, the Swedish church has a very good record. You don't just look at Israel and Palestine. I mean, you also look at what's going on in Africa, for example. All right. I mean, the Swedish church has a very, from what I understand, a consistent track record of applying your religious and theological principles anywhere in the world where you see injustice. That would be a good thing for, I don't know how one does this without seeming to be defensive, but that would be a very good thing for Israelis to understand. Because, again, this is one of the little lies that our demagogues use to reinforce this idea of this just shows that any criticism of Israel is anti-Israel and anti-Semitic and what have you. So my first piece of advice is always to check our own biases and try to be as free of biases as possible. The second piece of advice that I often give is to reach out to the Jewish community. Now, there's not a huge Jewish community in Sweden, but there is one. Last time I was here, I met with some of the folks there, and I can tell you that I'm sure that many of the official statements by the Jewish community here are probably defensive and Israel right or wrong. But I can tell you that I met with a room full of people from the Jewish community in Stockholm who shared some of our angst about some of the actions of Israel. But even with the people with whom you won't find any common ground, it is still important to dialogue, because even when we don't agree, the dialogue, the discourse is different when we are arguing with a faceless they and people that have faces and names and people that we know. It's a different kind of dynamic. And that alone doesn't make agreement, doesn't bring us to agreement, but it makes it more possible, and at least it makes the tone of our disagreements a little bit different. And along with that, the third thing that I always suggest is come and visit Israel and Palestine with people, whether they be from the Jewish community or within the Christian community, or the secular community or whatever, who think very differently than you do. And the reason is, when people go and you visit Israel and Palestine, you come back with truth. You have seen truth. You have met people, you have seen, and therefore you know truth. So some people come and you meet with Israeli government officials. You hear our version of the Gaza wars. You do the tour with Israeli army of the separation barrier. You meet families, Israeli families who have lost loved ones to terror attacks. And other people come and you meet with the families of the Palestinian shaheedim. And you see the Palestinian demolished homes. And you see the separation barrier from the Palestinian side. And so on and forth. And it's like never the twain shall meet. And then when you come back here and you hear somebody else speaking their truth, which is so different than your truth, they have to be lying. It can't be, because I've seen truth. And were people from such diverse opinions to go together and everybody have a hand in setting the itinerary, it still doesn't mean that you're going to come back and agree on everything. But at least you have a common set of experiences to argue about. Some kind of a factual basis then to debate over, as opposed to everybody having versions of truth which simply go like this. So those are, I would say, the three pieces of advice I would give. I'll say one or two other comments about this outrageous op-ed, and then open things up for discussion. Again, a good demagogue knows how to take some truth and then distort it. Okay? It is true that, as I said, that compared to much of the world, Israel isn't doing so bad in terms of human rights. It's true that in many places in the world, if I were to come and give a talks like I'm doing here, I wouldn't be allowed home, or if I went home, my life would be in danger. I do live in a country that allows me to be a gadfly, allows me to do human rights work, allows me to use our court system, although our Minister of Injustice is now trying to destroy our court system. I do live in a country where I can use our free press. And again, I don't know the Swedish press so well, but I can tell you for sure that what is regularly, from our point of view, expressed in the mainstream, let alone the alternative Israeli press, is much wider than what I would ever find in the United States, for example. Okay, and so on and so forth. From there, and it is true that it is easier to uphold certain democratic principles when one is living in a relatively peaceful surroundings than where you do have people who would destroy you if you could. But from there to all of the things that the master says is simply outrageous. To talk about, as I said last night, in some ways, it is true that Israel is perhaps the strongest democracy in the Middle East. Internally, we have a true democracy with racism and discrimination, as does any democracy in the world, I think. But first of all, after 51 years of occupation, in which we're ruling over a people that have no democracy, it is increasingly difficult to separate between our internal Israeli democracy and our ruling over another people who have no say in any of the major institutions or bodies that decide their fate. And of course, even inside Israel, again, I'm not saying that there's some perfect democracy out there somewhere. But one of I was busy this morning rewriting an op-ed this morning about the village of Hiran. That's a Bedouin village inside Israel that exists where the state moved them from their original lands in 1956, made promises to them that here they would be able to rebuild their lives. But today, they are in the process of being removed by force so that on the rubble of their village, a Jewish community can be built. And, well, it's democratic because this is a government that the majority voted for or whatever. But we've forgotten that democracy is also about what the majority is forbidden to do. Such as, because the majority can always democratically trample on the rights of minorities. Okay. Nevertheless, so to talk about our wonderful democracy is partially true, but just partially not true. And of course, I was particularly outraged when the ambassador talks about, criticizes the church for some kind of Soviet-style not allowing of dissent. First of all, from what I know, and again, I'm not party to all the internal politics of Svenska kyrkan, but it seems to me, from the little I know, that there is quite a bit of pluralism allowed within the church. Not to mention the fact that our government today is conducting a very awful campaign of delegitimization and demonization of Israeli human rights organizations. Okay? So for them to talk about allowing, criticizing the church for not allowing freedom of opinion, to me is rather like the pot calling the kettle black, or as most of my Ethiopian friends would say, the pot calling the kettle white. But the point is that that is just an incredibly disingenuous and hypocritical argument for the Israeli ambassador to make. I could go on, but since we have limited amount of time, maybe I'll stop there and open things up for thought, debate, discussion, whatever.